I'll never forget that moment. The sound of the waves hitting the shore was as soft as a sigh. And I was there, standing in front of my new house, breathing in the mix of fresh-cut wood and salty breeze like it was an old song. After 45 years working as an engineer, saving dollar by dollar, I finally had what my wife and I dreamed of our entire lives. A little house by the sea, the place where we planned to grow old together. Except now I'm here alone. And the ocean, the one she always called the heart of heaven and earth, is now my only companion. My name is Arthur Miller. I'm 72 years old. A few months ago, I bought this house in Blue Harbor, a quiet, clean place surrounded by tall palms, white walls, a red-tiled roof, and windows that look directly at the ocean. I call it the last dream of my life. This house isn't a gift for anyone else, not for my son, not for my grandchildren. It's for me. I want to spend the rest of my days listening to the waves, reading, drinking coffee, and remembering the years I spent with Isabel, the woman I built my whole life with, but who passed away 5 years ago before I could keep my promise to buy a house by the sea to rest. The day I got the keys, I brought her portrait with me. I placed it on a small table on the deck, facing the sea. I threw the doors wide open, let the wind pour in, and whispered to her, "See, Isabel, we're finally here." Mornings are different here. The light doesn't hurt. It's soft, caramel-colored. The songs of the birds mix with the murmur of the waves, and the aroma of coffee drifts in through the window. I get up early. I put a few things in order and then go out onto the deck to watch the sun rise slowly out of the water. Sometimes I still talk to myself, as if she were still by my side. "The ocean is calm today, sweetheart. Oh, I still have your favorite chair. Some would call this loneliness, but for me, it's peace. I lived almost my whole life surrounded by noise, machines, construction sites, traffic, clients, colleagues. I got used to the hurry of the young, to interrupted plans, to phones that never stop ringing. Now, every sound from the sea makes me feel alive again. This house is my reward, my apology, my legacy to myself. I believed that, at least for these last few years, no one could break this calm. But life always finds a way to test our patience. That afternoon, while I was making my second cup of coffee, the phone rang. A familiar voice filtered through the sound of the wind. "Dad, I'm landing in 2 hours with 30 people. Get dinner ready and make up the rooms. We're going to spend a month there." I stood frozen, thinking I'd heard wrong. "What did you say, Rick?" "I just moved in." "Exactly, Dad. We've got to break it in. Monica's whole family's coming. Don't worry. We're bringing the fun." The fragile peace I'd waited so long for began to shatter into pieces like a cracked glass in my hand. I looked out at the sea and saw the waves rising higher than usual. I heard the wind hit the windows. I don't know if it was a coincidence, but in that instant, I had the feeling the sea was trying to warn me. A storm was coming. I was still holding the phone, listening to the whistle of the wind through the earpiece like a long sigh from the sea. On the other end of the line, Rick, my only son, spoke with that confident, almost demanding voice. "Dad, don't worry. It's going to be fun. The house is big, right?" I closed my eyes, trying to stay calm. "Rick, do you realize I just moved in 3 days ago? I haven't even bought enough plates, and I still haven't put together the bed in the guest room." "Dad, don't overreact. We've got air mattresses. Besides, we're family. Nobody's going to complain." The way he said, "we're family," left a lump in my throat. For years, he only used those words when he needed something from me, when he had to pay his kids' tuition, when his wife wanted to remodel their house, or when he bought a new car and couldn't quite cover the down payment. We're family. As if those 2 words were a magic key that opened every door, even the door to a father's tired heart. I took a deep breath. The sea was still calm, but inside me, the waves were starting to churn. "Rick, son, I'm not against the family visiting, but I need time to get organized, at least a week. I bought this house to rest, not to—" "Dad, please, don't start with the drama. Monica already told everyone. Her aunts, her cousins, her nephews, they're already on the road. I can't tell them to turn back." I sat down in the chair, my hand trembling slightly. I heard my own sigh, long and heavy as the crash of a wave. "So, you invited them before you even asked me?" That's why you bought such a big house, right, Dad? To enjoy it with the family. I let out a dry laugh. You're right, Rick. I bought this house to enjoy it, but not to serve it. I'm not a hotel manager. Silence on the other end. Then his voice turned cold. Dad, you're selfish. You always have been. You can't spend 1 month sharing what you have. You're not alone in this world. I looked at Isabel's portrait on the table. She was still smiling with that sweetness she always had. I spoke to her in a low voice, not knowing if I was saying it for her or for me. No, I'm not alone. I'm just at peace. Dad? You still there? I'm here, Rick. Then get ready. We'll be there in 2 hours. What did you say? 2 hours, we're already on the highway. Rick, listen to me. But the sound of a dial tone cut me off. I looked at the phone in my hand. The conversation was over. The house fell silent again. Only the ticking of the clock marked the time, like a countdown. I went out onto the deck. The wind brought the salty smell and tangled my hair. The sea was still blue, but it didn't look as serene as it had this morning. I felt something approaching, slow but inevitable. I looked toward the horizon where the sky was starting to change color, and I whispered to Isabel, Sweetheart, it looks like we're going to have company. Then I smiled weakly, a tired but firm smile. Maybe it was time to learn to say no, not just to strangers, but to my own blood. I went back inside. I poured more coffee and sat by the window, watching the sea. 2 hours. Just 2 more hours, and the peace I had just found could vanish. But this time, I wasn't going to let anyone snatch it away so easily. I sat there on the wooden deck chair, the cold coffee cup between my hands. The sound of the sea was constant, like the breathing of the earth, but inside me, nothing was calm anymore. I kept looking at the horizon, where the sea melted into the pale gray sky, and I thought, maybe I should just let them come. After all, he's my son. I sighed. The thought was weak, yes, but deeply human. A father, no matter how many times he's been hurt, always softens at those 2 words. The family. My eyes fell on Isabel's photo, placed on the little wooden table by the window. The afternoon light filtered through the glass of the frame, making her face shine, serene and sweet, as if she were still smiling. I spoke to her in a low voice. What would you do in my place, Isabel? Would you kick them out? Or would you put out more chairs, more plates, and tell me, let them be, Arthur, they're our children? I imagined her laugh, that deep, warm laugh that used to fill our old house with joy. I remembered those years when Rick was a boy, and we took him to the ocean for the first time. He ran along the shore with a red kite in his hand, laughing his head off. Isabel said to me then, Look at him, he's just like you. He wants to control everything, but he's terrified of losing the ones he loves. Thinking about it now, her words seemed like a prophecy. He grew up, became a strong man, with a good position, a family. But deep down, he was still that boy who wanted everything to go his way. Except now, what he was trying to control wasn't a kite, but the lives of others. My life. I stood up and walked slowly down the hardwood hallway, brushing my fingers along each freshly painted door. Each empty room echoed my own voice back at me. This house is yours, Arthur, I told myself. Don't let anyone turn it into the noisy place that Isabel always dreaded. I picked up the phone and looked for Rick's name in the contact list. My finger hovered over the screen. Call him to tell him not to come, or just ask him to bring fewer people. But I knew that with Rick, less didn't exist. He was used to being told yes, to others giving in. And I knew that well because his whole life I was the one who taught him that. Not with words, but with silence and resignation. I smiled bitterly. Maybe this story wasn't just about a ruined vacation. Maybe it was time to correct my parenting, even if it was late. I left the phone on the table and looked at the wall clock. 1 hour and 10 minutes left. There was no more time to hesitate. I went out to the deck. The wind was blowing harder, bringing the salty taste of the sea. Under the twilight, the water shone like thousands of fragments of broken glass. I spoke to myself, word by word, slowly and firmly. This time, Arthur, your son will learn, but he'll learn from your silence, not from your shouting. I went into the house, took my notebook, and opened it to the first page where I had written the day I bought it. I bought it for calm. I live for peace. I nodded slowly. Yes, I would honor what I had written. Only an hour left and the storm named Rick was about to arrive, but unlike before, this time I was ready. I stood up and went to the kitchen, where the smell of cold coffee still hung in the air. I poured the rest down the sink and turned on the water, letting the sound drown out the whirlwind of thoughts in my head. 2 hours. Just 2 more hours. And the house I'd once called my refuge would turn into a campground for 30 strangers. I opened the cabinet and pulled out the purchase agreement. The paper still smelled like ink and new wood. I flipped through it until I got to the part that said Blue Harbor Community Rules and Regulations. I read line by line and smiled faintly. Of course, that's why I had chosen this place, even though it cost twice as much as the others. Loud parties are prohibited. No more than 8 guests per house are permitted. All visitors must be registered in writing by the owner. Violations will be sanctioned or the guests will be required to leave the premises. I closed the agreement. If Rick wanted to turn my house into a hotel, fine. He was about to meet the strictest front desk manager on the coast, the rule book. I picked up the phone and dialed the community security office. Good afternoon, Blue Harbor Security? Yes, good afternoon. This is Arthur Miller, owner of House 14. Mr. Miller, welcome to the neighborhood. Is everything all right? That depends. In 2 hours, a large group of unauthorized people will be arriving. I want you to be ready for them. Do you want us to deny them entry? Not exactly. I just want you to explain the rules to them in detail, make them read the whole thing, word for word, and call me when they arrive. I heard a faint chuckle in the guard's voice. Understood, sir. We'll make sure they thoroughly enjoy the rules. I smiled. It had been a long time since I felt this calm, maybe because I knew that this time I didn't have to shout or beg anyone. I just had to let the rules speak for me. I tidied the table, straightened the chairs, and placed Isabel's photo a little higher. Look, sweetheart, today I'm going to learn to protect what's mine. It might have taken me a while, but it's never too late to learn. The wind came through the window, and the white curtain moved gently, like a wave. For a second, I thought I heard her voice. It's about time, Arthur. I went out onto the deck. The sun was beginning to dip toward the west, painting every wave golden. In the distance, a few seagulls flew, skimming the water, just like in that old painting Isabel used to hang in our bedroom. I remembered her words from long ago. When people take advantage of your kindness, silence can also be an answer. Yes, this time I would be silent, but a silence with boundaries. I went into the living room and turned on the old radio. A smooth Nat King Cole song filled the air. The guitar mixed with the sea breeze as if the past were returning in soft notes. As the music played, I wrote a small note and stuck it on the refrigerator. This house is not a hotel. Anyone who wants to stay must do so with respect. My handwriting was a little shaky, but every stroke was firm. I made another cup of coffee. I went out to the deck and sat facing the sea. I had 2 hours to prepare, 2 hours to defend what was mine. I took a sip and watched the sky turn copper. In front of me, the community gate was clearly visible. I knew that as soon as I heard the first engine, the storm named Rick would be about to begin. I smiled and murmured, "This time, Isabel, I'm not backing down." I heard the roar of engines in the distance, just as the sun was hiding behind the palm trees. The small road that leads to Blue Harbor began to tremble with the rumble of 5 large SUVs. The headlights bounced off the sea, and the waves seemed to frown with white flashes. I was on the deck, my 3rd cup of coffee in hand, and I murmured, "They're here, Isabel, our little family squall." From my vantage point, I could see the community entrance. The 2 guards I had called ahead were ready by the guardhouse, their shirts buttoned up, their posture straight, almost solemn, as if they were waiting for a ceremony. Next to them, the large sign read, "Private Community. Access by owner's authorization only." The sound of brakes squealed. Doors opened, and one after another they started to pile out. Suitcases, coolers, baskets of food, and even huge cases of beer. I did a quick count. More than 30 people. Rick was the first to get out, hair slicked back, White polo shirt, expensive sunglasses, and that confident smile of someone who thinks everything is under control. Behind him came Monica, my daughter-in-law, with their 2 children. I recognized her look, that way of seeing the place as if she were walking into a luxury resort, not her father-in-law's house. She was smiling, recording with her phone while saying, "We made it to paradise, the father-in-law's house, oceanfront, the father-in-law's house." I felt a pang in my chest. This wasn't the father-in-law's house. It was the fruit of a lifetime of work, of sleepless nights and calloused hands. The guard raised his hand to stop them. "Good afternoon, folks. Where are you headed?" Rick flashed his practice smile. "To my father's house, Arthur Miller. He just bought in here. We're family." The guard nodded and consulted a list. "And all of these people are immediate family?" Rick hesitated a bit. "Well, some are. The others are my wife's relatives, but we're all coming to spend the month together." The guard opened a binder and in a firm tone began to read. "Allow me to explain the community rules." From my deck, I could see Rick's expression starting to change. He straightened up, hands on his hips while the others murmured in confusion. "What's wrong?" The guard continued with professional calm. "First, all visits must be authorized in writing by the owner. My dad knows we're coming." "And did he authorize it in writing?" "No, but—" "Second," the guard interrupted, "no parties or loud music are allowed after 9 p.m. and third point. A maximum of 8 guests per house in the beach area." A voice from the group exclaimed. "8? But there are 30 of us." Rick tried to laugh. "There must be exceptions, right?" The guard didn't even flinch. "None, sir. Furthermore, each visitor must pay a daily maintenance fee, $25 per person." The air became thick. I could imagine Rick's face, eyebrows furrowed, jaw tight. He was doing the mental math. 30 people, $25, 30 days. "What kind of place is this?" he growled. The guard pointed to the sign. "The rules are clear, sir." I took a sip of coffee just as the phone rang. "Mr. Miller, your son is here with several people. Do you wish to confirm access?" "There are 30 of them, right?" "Exactly, sir." "Good. No one gets in until they've heard every single rule, one by one." "Understood." I could hear Rick's voice on the other end when the guard handed him the phone. "Dad, what is all this? Why the big hassle? We're your family." I took a deep breath, my gaze fixed on the sea, which was already darkening. "Son, you share love with family, not disrespect." I hung up. From the deck, I watched as the faces transformed. Some went back to their cars, the children looked down, and Rick stood frozen, not knowing whether to argue or give up. I exhaled slowly. For the first time in many years, I wasn't afraid to stand up to my own blood. The sea continued to break against the shore, constant, as if applauding in silence. 20 minutes later, I was still on the deck, watching everything from a distance as if I were at the movies. The sea breeze carried echoes of voices, arguments, and children crying from the entrance of Blue Harbor. In the orange sky, the heavy clouds seemed irritated by all the noise. Rick was in the middle of the group, his white shirt already wrinkled, his face red with frustration. I saw him pick up his phone, pace back and forth, yelling at the guard, but the guard didn't budge. He just held the rulebook and read from it in an implacable, calm voice. "Sir, it says it clearly right here. Unauthorized visitors must leave the community before nightfall." "But I'm the owner's son," Rick shouted. "Even so, sir, you need written authorization." Rick turned to the group. "Don't worry, my dad is going to fix this. It's just a misunderstanding." But I knew there was no misunderstanding, only consequences. A woman, probably Monica's sister, started to complain. "You made us drive 6 hours for this, Rick," another man chimed in. "And who's going to pay the $25 per person? That's insane." I saw Rick lower his voice, trying to calm them, but his words were lost in the gusts of wind. Then my phone rang. It was security again. "Mr. Miller, do you wish to authorize entry?" Did they hear all the rules? "Yes, sir. Some of them got upset." "Then tell them they have 2 options. Follow the rules or leave." I heard the guard repeat my words to them. Then a long silence. Finally, my son's voice came on the line, loaded with frustration. "Dad, are you really going to do this? Everyone is here. We can't go back." I kept my tone serene, almost cold. Rick, with the same certainty you told me, I'll be there in 2 hours. I'm answering you. Yes, I'm serious. Dad, this is absurd. We just want to spend time with you. Spending time with me would be you coming alone, not with 30 strangers. I hung up without waiting for a reply. From the window, I saw some of them starting to get into their cars. The red taillights reflected on the damp pavement as they drove away, one by one. Others kept arguing. Monica, my daughter-in-law, looked lost, looking around as if searching for someone to blame. I saw in her the expression of someone accustomed to comfort who for the first time has hit a wall. After almost half an hour, only half the group remained. Rick, finally, agreed to sign the visitor log. He walked toward the house with slow steps, his face hardened. When he opened the door, I was already waiting, still with my coffee cup in hand. "Welcome, those of you who are left," I said in a calm voice. Monica forced a smile. "Mr. Miller, please forgive the misunderstanding. Everything happened so fast." I pointed to the suitcases. "Put them wherever you can. The house only has 4 bedrooms. I'm not opening anymore." Rick dropped his bag heavily, looking around with a mix of anger and embarrassment. "Dad, couldn't you have warned me about these rules before?" "You didn't ask, did you?" I replied, not breaking my gaze. The silence that followed was heavy. Outside, the sun was gone, and the sea was hitting the shore hard. Under the yellow light of the living room, Rick avoided my eyes, Monica looked down, and the others whispered among themselves. I could feel it, the discomfort, the tension, the wounded pride. I stepped out onto the deck, and without raising my voice too much, I said just enough for everyone to hear. "Well, now that you're here, remember, this isn't just a beach house, it's my home. And around here, the sea isn't the only thing with rules." I closed the door slowly, leaving them in their own silence. Outside, the sea wind began to blow harder. I knew this was only the prelude to the real storm. That night, my house stopped being the quiet refuge it had been in the morning. The voices, the laughter, the scraping of chairs, the mixed smell of food and perfume filled the air until it was thick. I sat on the deck, trying to enjoy the sea breeze, but every time the door opened, the noise spilled out like a wave crashing on the shore. I heard Rick's voice from the kitchen in a commanding tone. "Monica, check the rooms. Mom said this one has the best view. We'll take it," Monica replied in a low voice. "But that's the master bedroom, honey. I think it's your dad's." "It's fine. He can sleep in the living room. It's just for a few days." I closed my eyes and counted my breaths. They say ingratitude starts in the details, and I believe it's true. I went into the house. Rick was opening my closet and taking out the new towels. He turned and smiled at me. "Dad, do you mind if we use your room? It has air conditioning and the kids need to rest," I replied slowly. "Rick, this is my room. This bed is the only place I've slept well after many years of insomnia. But it's just for one night." I looked him directly in the eye. "And if you're still here tomorrow, it will also be just for one night." The air grew dense. Monica tried to intervene gently. "Mr. Miller, we really don't want to bother you. If you prefer, we can all sleep together in the guest room." I smiled. "No, ma'am. Sleep wherever you want, but I'm not moving from my bed." Rick pressed his lips together to keep from losing control and dragged the suitcase to the room next door. "Fine. If that's how you want it, fine." I went to the kitchen. A woman I had never seen before, probably one of Monica's cousins, had her head halfway inside the refrigerator. "Excuse me, Mr. Miller. Do you have anything for dinner? We only found yogurt." "No, ma'am. I only bought food for myself. If you're hungry, there's a store 3 blocks away." She looked at me, surprised. "And you're not going to cook for everyone?" I answered curtly. "I'm not a cruise ship chef, ma'am." There were a few seconds of uncomfortable silence. Then the murmurs began to grow. A man said loudly, "What's with the father-in-law? He's treating us like enemies." I turned, looking at them with the coldness of the sea before a storm. "It would be worse if I treated you like friends," Monica blushed. "Dad, why would you say that?" I sighed. "Because friends call before they come." The entire house fell silent. You could only hear the sea pounding in the distance. A few minutes later, Mrs. Diaz, Monica's mother, approached me with a soft voice. "Mr. Miller, I understand your anger. I also didn't know Rick was planning this. If you want, we'll leave tomorrow." I looked at her, and for the first time all night, I smiled with a little tenderness. "Ma'am, you are the only one here who understands what respect means. Please don't worry, but tell your daughter that this house is not a hotel." She nodded. I saw sadness in her eyes, but also understanding. When night fell, I went back to the deck. The light from inside filtered through the windows, diffuse and warm. I heard Rick's voice in the living room, speaking low. "My dad's always been like this. Never knows how to have fun, always with his rules." I smiled bitterly and murmured to myself, "And thanks to my rules, I still have peace, son." The night wind brought the smell of salt and humidity, heavy as a warning. I knew this wasn't the end. When people start to believe they have rights in someone else's house, all boundaries get erased. But I also knew they would only need one night to understand why these walls exist. I closed the deck door, turned off the lights, and left a small lamp on in my room. "Sleep well, Isabel," I whispered. "I don't think I'll be able to. There's too much noise in our house tonight." The next morning, I wasn't awakened by the sound of the sea, but by the smell of fried eggs and the murmur of voices coming from the kitchen. It was barely 6:30, and the house already sounded like a marketplace. I went out to the deck, but as soon as I opened the door, a wave of laughter, clashing plates, and hurried footsteps hit my ears like a swarm. Monica was in the kitchen in a colorful floral robe, her hair half up, stirring a pan with a spatula. Next to her, a large man I'd never seen before had his head buried in the refrigerator. "Morning, Mr. Miller," he said. The table was packed with people, each with their plate and plastic cup, napkins tossed everywhere. There were grease stains on the floor. "For everyone?" I repeated in a low voice. "And with what ingredients, if there was nothing in the fridge last night?" The large man spoke up confidently. "We bought some last night. Don't worry, Suegro. We put it on a tab and we'll settle up with Rick later." I frowned. "Suegro? I only have one son, and his wife's name is Monica." The guy let out an awkward laugh. "Well, we're her family. It's all in the house." "In my house," I said dryly. "Nothing is all in without asking." The silence was immediate. Monica forced a smile. "Mr. Miller, please don't start the day like this. We're on vacation." I picked up a dirty napkin from the table and threw it in the trash. Then I looked her in the eye. "And I'm not. I came here to rest, and you are preventing me from doing that." The kitchen went quiet. Rick appeared from the hallway, disheveled, phone in hand, and a yawn on his face. "What's going on in here?" "What's going on is that your family thinks I live in an all-you-can-eat buffet," I answered bluntly. Rick frowned. "Dad, please don't exaggerate. They're cooking for everyone." "With my gas, my oil, and my patience?" "Always the same," he huffed. "You don't know how to share. What's the big deal?" I looked at him with a mixture of sadness and firmness. "People only share what they have to spare, Rick, and you're already taking all the peace I have." Monica dropped the spatula in the sink with a loud clang. "This is just too much. It's not like he's a stranger." "And you're not," I replied calmly. "How many times have you called me this year, Monica?" "Well, we've been busy." "Exactly. But you had time to invite 30 people to a house that isn't yours." The sentence cut the air like a knife. A young woman, maybe Monica's cousin, stood up indignantly. "We're not invaders, sir. We're family." "And what's your name?" I asked. "Jasmine." "And did you know me before yesterday, Jasmine?" "No." "Then you're not my family. You're my son's wife's cousin. There's a big difference." The silence was absolute. Rick opened his mouth but said nothing. I walked to the door and spoke slowly. "Of course you can stay, but remember, everyone cleans up their own mess, and anyone who isn't comfortable, there are hotels in town." Mrs. Diaz, Monica's mother, stood up calmly. "Mr. Miller, you're right. Rick, honey, this isn't right. You don't just show up at someone's house like this." Monica looked at her, offended. "Mom, for God's sake, we're talking about my father-in-law." "Exactly, dear, and your father-in-law deserves respect." Rick looked down, not responding. I looked at Mrs. Diaz and nodded with gratitude. Sometimes, a single adult voice can save an entire morning. I left the kitchen and went back to the deck. The sea was still calm, but I knew that inside the house, the waves were already rising. There were people who had never learned to be respectful, living in a space that didn't belong to them. And soon, the house itself would teach them the lesson I didn't need to. I took a sip of fresh coffee. The salt wind brushed my lips. "See, Isabel," I whispered, "I'm learning to say enough in the softest voice I have." At noon, the house was submerged in a heavy heat, and the smell of oil left over from breakfast. There was no laughter, no music, just a thick silence. I sat on the deck watching the sea. The surface was calm, but I knew the real storm was inside, within the walls at my back. The door opened slowly. Mrs. Diaz, Monica's mother, came out with a cup of coffee in her hand. She set it gently on the table and spoke in a low but sweet voice. "Mr. Miller, I brought you some coffee. I know you haven't eaten anything." I looked up and smiled. "Thank you, ma'am. Out here the silence tastes better than breakfast." She nodded, her gaze full of genuine remorse. "You're right, Mr. Miller. This isn't right. My daughter insisted so much on coming, and I just kept quiet. I didn't think it would be such a big deal." I left the cup on the table and answered calmly, though firmly. "You don't have to apologize. It's not your fault that others don't understand what respect is." We watched the sea for a few minutes. Then she spoke serenely. "Can I give you a piece of advice? Don't give in, Mr. Miller. If you do it once, they'll do it forever. Sometimes being firm is the most honest way to love." I nodded. "Thank you, ma'am. You have more common sense than everyone who arrived here combined." She smiled weakly and went back inside. I heard her soft voice talking to her daughter. "Monica, your father-in-law is right. You don't just show up at someone's house like this, even if it's family." Monica's voice hardened. "Mom, he's my father-in-law, not a stranger. That's precisely why you should be more careful." A silence, followed by a long, tired sigh from Monica, mixed with the sound of the sea hitting the shore. Rick came out onto the deck, his face less arrogant, his shoulders slumped. "Dad?" "Yes," I answered. "This is getting out of control. Everyone is uncomfortable. We didn't mean to bother you." "And yet you did," I said in a calm tone. "Respect isn't measured by intention, but by actions." Rick looked down, silent. Behind him, Monica appeared, her voice softer than usual. "Mr. Miller, we don't want to argue anymore. If you want, we'll leave tomorrow." I took a sip of coffee. The sea wind brought a faint salty taste that brushed my neck. "I'm not asking you to leave, Monica. I'm just asking you to learn how to stay with respect." They said nothing more. They turned around and went inside, leaving me alone with the murmur of the sea. A little later, Mrs. Diaz came out again. Her smile was calmer this time. "Mr. Miller, sometimes the sea teaches the same lessons as life. The calmer it seems, the more strength it has underneath." I nodded, looking at the horizon. "And sometimes, ma'am, respect is learned the same way. After a storm." She smiled, and her presence brought a light breeze that eased the midday heat. For the first time in 2 days, I felt that there was a little peace left in that house, not because everyone had understood, but because at least one sensible voice had made itself heard above the noise, the voice of reason. In the afternoon, the sky filled with gray clouds. From the deck, I heard the roar of engines in the distance, a heavy, urgent sound, as if it was coming to tear apart the little calm left in the day. I looked toward the entrance of the Blue Harbor community. The 2 guards were in position, hands raised to stop traffic. Outside, at least 3 vehicles were parked in a line. The phone rang. "Mr. Miller? This is the guard at the gate. I'm sorry, but more people have arrived claiming to be your relatives." I froze. "More people? How many?" "About 10, sir. They say they're with Mr. Rick's group." I smiled in disbelief, not knowing whether to be angry or to laugh. "Don't authorize them. No one gets in without my permission." "Understood, sir." I hung up. I took a deep breath and went into the house. Rick and Monica were in the living room, their faces tired after lunch. "Dad, what's wrong?" "What's wrong is that your guests are still arriving." Rick turned pale. "What? That can't be. It's probably the ones who left last night. They were going to stay in town." "Well, it seems they changed their minds, and now they're outside." Monica stood up, alarmed. "Mr. Miller, you can't leave them out there. It's embarrassing." I looked at both of them and spoke slowly. "Embarrassment is caused by those who abuse, not by those who set boundaries." Rick tried to soften his tone. Dad, just for tonight, okay? Let them sleep inside, in the living room. There's no room, Rick. They can sleep on the floor. They won't bother anyone. I crossed my arms and stared at him. Would you sleep on the floor if you had to? Yeah, sure. Perfect. Then you sleep on the floor. We'll give your room to 2 of the people outside. Rick blushed. Dad, don't be unfair. Unfair? Unfair was you bringing 30 people without notice. This is just the consequence. Monica intervened nervously. Mr. Miller, please don't leave them outside. My mother will be mortified. Your mother is the only one here who understands respect. She'll know what to do. I went back to the deck and the phone rang again. Sir, the people outside say they are going to camp at the entrance until you let them in. Camp? At the entrance to a private community? Yes, sir. They're already taking out tents. I let out a dry, incredulous laugh. Please call the local police. They can't camp on private property. Tell them to leave. Right away, sir. I hung up. Monica looked at me, horrified. You called the police? Dad, that's too much. No, honey. Too much was bringing a crowd to a house that didn't want them. Rick clenched his fists. What if they get arrested, Dad? They're family. Then let them learn that family also has to know the meaning of the word permission. Half an hour later, police sirens sounded in the distance. I looked out the window. 2 patrol cars stopped at the gate, their red and blue lights flashing under the cloudy sky. The officers spoke with the group trying to camp, and little by little they began to take down the tents. Some protested, others silently got into their cars and left. Rick watched the scene, eyes wide, as if he was just now understanding something. Dad, did you really do all this? I answered calmly, my voice as serene as the sea breeze. I didn't do it, Rick. The rules did. I just finally learned to respect them. The atmosphere in the house turned heavy. Monica was sobbing quietly, while Mrs. Diaz remained still, sad, but understanding. A while later, the phone rang one more time. Sir, they're gone. Everything's in order. Thank you. Finally, silence. I went out to the deck. The sea was choppy, the wind bringing the smell of salt and rain. Inside the house, no one spoke. For the first time, Rick had nothing to say. Maybe he was beginning to understand that sometimes silence is the strongest lesson. The wind blew steady, and I murmured toward the horizon. Do you hear that, Isabel? The sea has given me back my calm. That night, after the police left, the house returned to silence. A thick silence like the one that follows a storm. The sea continued to hit the shore, but it didn't sound the same. Now it sounded like the tired breathing of fatigue. I stayed on the deck. Inside, no one dared to speak. Around 9 o'clock, I heard hurried footsteps in the kitchen and a young, altered voice. Mr. Miller, there's a huge cockroach in the pantry. I turned and saw Jason, the 25-year-old cousin of Monica, pale as if he'd seen a ghost. I took a sip of coffee and suppressed a smile. And what do you want me to do about it? Kill it. Insects disgust me. Visits that show up unannounced disgust me. Everyone has their problems, kid. I heard suppressed laughter from the living room, and Jason, red with embarrassment, turned around and disappeared. I wasn't angry. I found it funny and a little pathetic. There are adults who can drive a car but don't know how to kill a cockroach. A few minutes later, Monica came out, her voice calmer. Mr. Miller, Jason isn't used to that. At home, his mom does everything. And how old is he? I asked. 25. I shrugged. Well, it's time he got used to it. I went back to the deck thinking I would finally have some peace, but then I heard Rick from his room. Dad, the hot water isn't working. Did you check the boiler? I don't know where it is. In the utility room. Red button. Press it. Can't you come look at it? I looked at the ceiling and stifled a sigh. Rick, I'm 72 and you're 45. I think you can handle a button. A minute later, I heard him yell. Got it! It's working! I smiled to myself. A miracle, I thought. Looks like he learned something today. But the lessons weren't over. Around 10, there was a soft knock on the door. It was Mrs. Diaz, tired but always polite. Mr. Miller, I'm sorry to bother you again. I wanted to talk to you. Of course, ma'am, come in. She sat in the chair across from me and sighed. My grandchildren aren't comfortable, and Monica is very embarrassed. But I'll tell you something. You're doing the right thing. If you don't set boundaries now, they'll never understand." I smiled faintly. "You have a clarity that you don't see much anymore. Age teaches you, Mr. Miller, and believe me, I made mistakes with Monica too. I always protected her too much. Maybe that's why she never learned to respect boundaries." We listened to the sea. Her voice softened. "You're teaching them something that school doesn't, consequences." "That's what I'm trying to do," I replied, "to make them understand that respect isn't imposed with shouting, but with facts." At that moment, Jason reappeared, even paler. "Mr. Miller, there's no toilet paper in the bathroom." I looked at the clock and smiled wearily. "In the linen closet in the hallway. You have hands, don't you?" "Yes, but I don't know which one it is." I turned to Mrs. Diaz and murmured, "See? A grown man who can't find toilet paper. That's the portrait of this generation." She let out a little laugh. "That's why I'm telling you, don't give in." When she left, I stayed, thinking about Rick. He wasn't a bad man, just someone who had grown up used to having everything done for him. I remembered when he was a kid. I did everything for him, thinking that was love. But love without boundaries is also a form of neglect, neglecting the duty to teach responsibility. I looked through the half-open door and saw him clearing the plates, something he probably hadn't done in years. Monica was by his side, silent. They both looked exhausted. But for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt that at last, the lessons were beginning to take effect. I closed the door completely. Outside, the moon was reflected on the sea, bright as a long, perfect mirror. I whispered, "Thanks, Isabel. I think tonight I've remembered what I forgot long ago. Being a father isn't about indulging. It's about teaching them their limits." The next morning, I was awakened by insistent knocking on my door. When I opened it, I saw Rick, pale and disheveled. "Dad, we have a problem." I set my coffee cup on the table and sighed. "Another one. The HOA committee is here. They want to talk to you." I went out to the deck. Outside, 3 men in white polo shirts with name badges hanging around their necks were waiting with serious expressions. The oldest stepped forward. "Good morning, Mr. Miller. I'm Mr. Herrera, president of the Blue Harbor HOA." "Good morning, Mr. Herrera. How can I help you?" "We have a situation. Last night, the people who were camping outside left trash all over the community entrance. Bottles, food, cans, and the neighbors are upset." I nodded, unsurprised. "I understand, but those people were not my guests, sir." Herrera glanced at Rick. "Weren't they your relatives?" I looked at him directly, my voice serene. "His relatives, not mine, and they arrived without authorization." Rick looked down, mumbling. "Dad, don't make them look bad." Herrera adjusted his glasses. "Young man, you were the one who invited them, correct?" "Yes, sir, but I didn't know they were going to leave trash." "That's no excuse. When you invite people, you are responsible for what they do." Rick could only nod. Herrera continued. "The bylaws state that the homeowner will be fined if the mess is not cleaned up immediately. The fine would be $500. Rick's eyes widened in alarm. $500? "Dad, you can't pay that because of me," I replied slowly. "I don't intend to." "Then what are we going to do?" Herrera intervened firmly. "If the young man cleans up the trash today, there will be no fine, but it must be spotless." I turned to my son. "You heard him? It's your responsibility." Rick opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "You invited them. You clean it up." He had no way out. He hung his head and went to get trash bags. An hour later, I watched him from the deck. Rick, along with 2 of his relatives, was picking up cans and food scraps under the hot sun. His shirt was soaked, his hands full of sand. I watched him in silence, my coffee in hand. I didn't feel satisfaction, just a mixture of sadness and relief. At last, my son was doing something for himself. Mrs. Diaz came to my side. "Don't help him, Mr. Miller. It's good for him to do it alone." "I wasn't planning on it," I replied. "He needs to learn how much it costs to fix a mistake." She nodded, with a serene and understanding look. At noon, Rick came back drenched in sweat, smelling of sun and sand. "It's clean." "Dad? And what did you learn?" "That my guests are pigs." "And what else?" "That I should have asked you before I brought them." "And what else?" He looked down and said in a low voice, "That decisions made without respect have consequences." I barely smiled. There's your lesson. No punishment teaches better than your own shame. I offered him a glass of water. Rick drank it in one gulp and collapsed into a chair. Exhausted, Monica came out from inside. She looked at him and then at me. Mr. Miller, thank you for not helping him. I shrugged. It wasn't necessary. Sometimes silence teaches more than 1,000 sermons. Rick remained quiet for a long time before saying in a low voice, Dad, you're right. I never realized how much I disrespected you. I put a hand on his shoulder gently. It's not too late, son. You can still learn. Respect isn't demanded. It's demonstrated. Outside, the sea blew a cool breeze. The gulls flew low, and for the first time in days, I felt the house breathe in peace. I looked at the sky and murmured, See, Isabel? I didn't have to yell. I just let them listen to the voice of their own consequences. The next morning, I got up early. The sky was clear. The wind brought a soft smell of salt, and the sound of the sea once again felt like the natural heartbeat of the house. For the first time in many days, I felt true calm. There were no shouts, no arguments, no smell of burnt oil, just the aroma of coffee and the murmur of the wind on the deck. As I drank my cup, I saw Mrs. Diaz come out onto the porch. She looked lighter, as if she had finally set a burden down. Good morning, Mr. Miller. It feels so peaceful today, doesn't it? I smiled. Yes, ma'am. The house finally sounds like a house, not a bus station. She laughed sweetly. I'll confess something. I spoke with Monica last night before bed. She cried a lot, but I think she finally understood. Understood what? That you're not angry, just tired of not being respected. I nodded, looking at the horizon. That's all it is, ma'am. I don't need them to love me. I just need them to respect me. We stood for a while in silence, watching the sea. She told me that some of the group had left early, without saying goodbye. I didn't blame them. They weren't bad people, just people who had never had to stop and look at their own actions. Rick came out soon after. His face was tired, but his eyes were different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a mixture of shame and understanding. Dad, the others left. It's just us, Monica, and the kids. Better that way. Maybe the house still has room for silence. He pressed his lips together, then spoke slowly. I want to thank you for not paying the fine. You were right. I had to do it. I nodded. I don't thank you for the mistake, but I do for the lesson it left you. A moment later, Monica appeared. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her face showed the exhaustion of the tense nights. She avoided my gaze at first, but then spoke in a low voice. Mr. Miller, I wanted to apologize. I said nothing. I waited. I thought it was a good idea for everyone to come. I thought it would make you happy, that you'd feel like you had company. I answered slowly, marking each word. It didn't hurt me that they came. It hurt me that you didn't ask before they did. She nodded, her voice trembling. You're right. Sometimes we confuse affection with entitlement. I smiled softer. And sometimes, Monica, respect is also a form of affection. Mrs. Diaz looked at her, her eyes moist. See, honey? It's not about fear, it's about respect. Monica took her mother's hand and whispered, I understand, Mom. The atmosphere in the house became light. My grandchildren ran across the deck laughing, their laughter mixed with the murmur of the sea. And one of them approached me with a shell in his hand. Grandpa, look, we found it on the beach. I took the shell, smiling tenderly. It's beautiful, isn't it? Do you know what it symbolizes? What? That everything the sea takes away, it returns in another form. They looked at me, not quite understanding, but they nodded. The sunlight made the shell shine in my hand, and for an instant I felt Isabel smiling somewhere nearby. Before going inside, I turned to Mrs. Diaz. Your presence here changed the course of this house. She smiled. No, Mr. Miller, I only did what the sea does. Calm the tide when everyone else wants to shout. I laughed. She was right. Sometimes all it takes is one calm person to keep the ship from sinking. At noon, as Rick was packing away the suitcases of those who had left, I heard him say to Monica, I don't think Dad changed. I think I just never understood him. I stayed on the deck, the wind moving my gray hair, my heart as light as a wave returning to the sea. For the first time in many years, Rick truly saw me, not as a father who was supposed to serve him, but as a man with a right to his own peace. I sat down. I placed the shell next to Isabel's portrait and whispered, "I think you would have liked this morning, Isabel, because the storm finally learned to listen to the sea." That afternoon, the golden light fell on the beach like a fine veil. I sat on the deck, closed my eyes, and listened to the sound of the sea while the aroma of fresh coffee filled the air. The house, at last, had become what I dreamed of, a place of silence, of soft wind, and of salt floating in the air. I heard footsteps behind me. It was Rick. He walked slowly, hands in his pockets, his face serene but still with a trace of confusion. The arrogance from before was gone. "Dad, can I sit?" "Of course. This deck isn't forbidden to anyone, as long as they know how to listen to the sea." He sat next to me. We were quiet for a few seconds, watching the gentle waves lap at the shore. I felt he was searching for the words. "Dad," he said at last in a low voice, "I want to apologize." I looked at him, not interrupting. "Not just for coming without notice," he continued, "but for all these years. I always thought that what you had was also mine, that because I was your son, I had the right to decide for you." "And what did you learn, Rick?" "That being your son doesn't give me that right, that respecting you doesn't mean staying away, but understanding that you have your own life, too." I nodded slowly. The sea breeze blew with a salty perfume and a rhythm that seemed to accompany our words. "What's important isn't the mistake, son, but what you do after you realize it. And I want to do it right, Dad. I really do." We fell silent. I looked at my rough hands, marked by the years, and spoke calmly. "When you were a boy, you asked me to teach you how to swim, but you were afraid of the sea. I always told you, don't fight the water, let it guide you. I think life is the same, Rick. It's not about imposing your will, but about floating with respect." Rick smiled melancholically, his eyes moist. "Maybe that's why I drowned so many times without even realizing it." I said nothing. In that instant, Monica appeared in the doorway with a cup of tea in her hands. She hesitated a second before speaking. "Mr. Miller, I also wanted to apologize, not just for coming without asking, but for judging your way of being." I smiled and gestured for her to come closer. "I don't need you to apologize for what happened. I just want you to understand what this house means to me. There's no luxury here, only peace. And that, my children, isn't shared out of obligation. It's shared out of love." Monica looked down. "Thank you for teaching us without yelling." There was no need to yell. The sea already did it for me. Mrs. Diaz came out behind them with her warm smile. "It seems the sea has finally calmed down." I nodded. "Yes, ma'am. But sometimes to find calm, you have to let the storm shake you first." She put a hand on her daughter's shoulder and murmured, "Honey, look at your father-in-law. That's the kind of man who teaches without punishing. Learn from him." Monica nodded, while Rick looked at me with a mixture of sadness and relief. "Dad, I wish I had listened to you sooner," I replied in a softer voice. "It's never too late, Rick. Learning to listen is also a way of loving." The three of us stayed in silence. In front of us, the sea shone with the reflection of the sunset, and the small waves looked like sighs of something that had finally found rest. I looked at Isabel's portrait on the table and whispered, almost voiceless, "See, Isabel, he finally learned what I never dared to teach him." The wind moved the white curtain gently. Monica collected the cups while Rick remained seated, watching the horizon with the expression of someone who has finally let go of a weight he didn't even know he was carrying. When the sun touched the line of the sea, I said the last sentence of that afternoon. Peace isn't imposed, it's defended. And today, finally, this house is breathing it again. Rick nodded without a word. I knew he had understood. And for the first time in many years, I felt my soul as serene as the sea when the wind finally goes to sleep. Night fell slowly. The sun was gone, and the moon spilled over the sea, leaving shimmers that looked like pieces of memories floating on the water. I sat alone on the deck with a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands. Inside the house, everyone was asleep, even Rick. Silence had returned to inhabit the place, and finally, the house was breathing. I looked up at the sky. The clouds had cleared, and under that soft light, I thought I saw Isabel smiling from some corner of time. Her image was so clear, I could almost hear her voice. "You did well, Arthur. You taught without shouting." I smiled. Maybe for the first time in my life, I understood that there are lessons not taught with words, but with the serene weight of silence. I stood up and went into the living room. On the table was the seashell my grandson had given me that morning. I picked it up and placed it next to Isabel's portrait. In the moonlight, the two objects reflected each other, an old memory and a new beginning. I sat in the armchair, letting the memories come to me. I remembered when I had just married Isabel. We had nothing, just our hands and a small dream, to build a home where you could hear the sea. She used to tell me, "I don't want a big house, Arthur. I want a house where you can hear love." It took me a lifetime to keep that promise, and when I finally did, she was already gone. I looked at the portrait and murmured, "See, sweetheart? This house finally has the sound of love, not of loud laughter, but of the calm that's born between those who once hurt each other." The sea wind slipped through the window, moving the white curtain. The sound of the waves mixed with my breathing. I understood that the sea knew the same thing I did, that to learn peace, you need years, losses, and a tired heart willing to surrender. I remembered when Rick was a child. Every time he made a mistake, Isabel was the patient one. She never scolded him. She just looked at him and said, "Respect isn't taught with fear, but with example." Maybe tonight, wherever she is, she's proud of me, because I finally managed to teach like her, by living with coherence. I rested my hand on the frame of her photo and stroked the cold glass. "Thank you, Isabel. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have had the patience to teach Rick. You still teach me, even from far away." I turned my gaze back to the sea. The surface was bathed in moonlight, vast and serene. The small waves hit gently, like sweet sighs from the woman I loved. I closed my eyes and listened to the wind pass through my hair, bringing the warmth of memories. In that instant, I felt her presence, not as an absence, but as the peace that now surrounded me. I whispered, almost for the sea to hear, "Sweetheart, our son finally grew up, not because of his age, but because he learned to bow his head." A soft breeze brushed my shoulder, moving the curtain. I smiled. Maybe it was her hand, like so many times when she told me I was right. I stood up and closed the deck door. Inside, the house slept under the silver moonlight, silent but alive. "This house, Isabel," I murmured. "It's finally what you dreamed of. A place where you don't just hear the sea, but also the sound of respect." I turned off the light, letting the moon illuminate her portrait. That night, for the first time in many years, I slept deeply. Outside, the sea continued to sing, soft, constant, and sincere, like the voice of Isabel in my dreams. The next morning I woke to the song of birds mixed with the murmur of the waves. The sky was so clear it looked as if it had been freshly washed by the night's rain. The sun's rays came through the window and lit up the table, where the small seashell was still next to Isabel's portrait. I took it in my hands. I turned it slowly. The spiral lines shone, and I thought, there are tiny things that still contain the entire sea inside them. I went out onto the deck. The early breeze brought the smell of coffee and salt. In the distance, I saw Rick walking along the shore with his two children. That image made me smile without realizing it. He bent down, picked something up, and showed it to his son. The little one raised his hand and shouted, "Look, Dad, another shell!" The sound reached the house, clear and happy. A pure, quiet sound, the kind I thought I'd never hear here again. Rick looked up and saw me. He waved with a shy but sincere smile. I responded with a slight nod. No words were necessary. Sometimes the silence between those who understand each other says more than any apology. A little later, he came up to the deck with the kids. "Dad, the kids wanted to give you this." The younger one handed me a small bag full of shells. "So your house has more luck, Grandpa." I stroked his hair, smiling. "Thank you, champ. I think the sea has given me back what it took from me." Rick was silent for a few seconds before saying, "Dad, I realized something this morning." "What's that, son?" "That I always wanted everything to revolve around me. But the sea taught me that no one is the center. You can only coexist if you learn to float with others." I looked at him, the sunlight reflecting on his face, and for the first time in many years, I saw him at peace. "The sea teaches many things, Rick," I said, "but you have to know how to listen to it." He smiled and sat next to me. The children ran around the deck, their laughter mixed with the sound of the waves. Soon after, Monica also came out, carrying a tray with bread and cups of tea. She looked at Rick, then at me, her voice soft. "Mr. Miller, I thought we could have breakfast together today. No guests, no noise." I nodded with a smile. "Now that sounds like a vacation." We sat around the wooden table. Toast, coffee, the sound of the sea, and a light breeze. Everything came together in a morning that Isabel would have loved. I watched them and understood that without saying it, we all knew this was the first time we were truly together as a family. After breakfast, as the kids ran toward the beach, Rick turned to me. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you buy this house here, so far from the city?" I smiled without taking my eyes off the horizon. "Because here, the sea doesn't applaud you for shouting. It listens to you when you're quiet." Rick looked down thoughtfully. I knew he understood. "Thanks, Dad, for not giving up on me." "I never gave up, son. I was just waiting for the sea to talk to you." We fell silent, letting the wind speak for us. I felt Isabel nearby, in the smell of the sea, in the rhythm of the waves, in the calm I had finally recovered. I didn't recover it with anger, but with patience. When Rick and Monica went for a walk with the kids, I stayed alone, looking at the bag of shells on the table. I took the smallest one. I put it in my palm and whispered, "Thank you, Isabel. You're still sending me gifts, even if it's through those who once hurt me." I put the shell in my pocket and went out onto the deck. The sea stretched out before me, brilliant, as if it were smiling. For the first time, I didn't feel old. I just felt that I had learned the lesson that a whole lifetime of work, love, and mistakes hadn't taught me. Peace isn't born from silence, but from choosing to be quiet when you could shout. In the afternoon, the sun filtered through the palm fronds, drawing golden stripes that moved across the sand. I sat in my old chair on the deck, watching the sea change color. In the distance, Rick was helping the kids build a sandcastle. Monica was taking pictures, her laughter floating on the air like a soft breeze. That scene, so simple and peaceful, warmed my heart. I took a sip of coffee and dialed the number of Robert, my old friend from the construction years. "Hey, Rob, how's life?" His voice came through, booming as always. "Hey, Arthur, just surviving retirement. And you? How's that new beach house? I heard you were happy." I laughed, a slow, rough laugh. "Happy after a hurricane." "Hurricane? What happened?" "My son, Rob, he showed up, with 30 people, unannounced." "No. 30? What did you do?" "Nothing. I let the rules do the talking and the sea did the rest." Robert let out a huge laugh. "You and your diplomacy. I would have kicked them all out." "I thought about it," I replied. "But sometimes silence carries more weight than a shout." We chatted a bit more and then hung up. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the horizon. What I had just said was true. There are some storms that just need to be heard, not won. A few minutes later, Rick came up to the deck. His hands were covered in sand, and his face was golden from the sun, but his smile was light, calm. "Dad, the kids want to show you their castle." I stood up and followed him to the shore. The little ones were laughing and proudly showing me their creation, a sand fortress with towers, walls, and on top, a shining shell. "Look, Grandpa, it's your house," I laughed, surprised. "My house?" "Yeah, it has rules and a sea that takes care of it." The child's words stopped me. I looked at Rick, who was smiling tenderly. "They heard us talking, Dad. They said respect can be a game, too." I crouched down and helped them reinforce a corner of the wall. "Well then, this castle has a future, because whoever learns to respect through play doesn't destroy when they grow up." Rick nodded, his gaze soft. Then he murmured, "Dad, I think I understand now why you love this place so much. Because here, no one hears you if you shout, I said, but everyone understands you if you speak calmly. He smiled. Just like you. The wind began to blow harder, and the waves grew. You know, Rick, I said, the sea and life are alike. If you challenge them, they knock you down. If you respect them, they hold you up. He didn't answer. He just followed my gaze to the horizon. The kids shouted as a big wave approached. They ran toward us as the sand dissolved in the water. The castle fell in seconds, turned into foam and mud. One of the little ones exclaimed sadly. It fell down. I stroked his hair. The sea doesn't destroy. It just reminds you that nothing lasts if it's not taken care of. The boy looked at me, thoughtful, and then he smiled. Then tomorrow we'll build another one, stronger. That's it, champ. That's how you learn, by falling and building again. Rick listened to it all. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said to me in a hoarse voice, Dad, thank you for letting me fall. I smiled. I didn't let you fall, son. I just let the sea teach you how to swim. We stood there, the wind blowing and the waves marking their eternal rhythm. I felt Isabel somewhere nearby, as if she were watching us from those same immense waters. The afternoon faded. The sunset stained the sea orange, and Rick, holding his children's hands, turned to me. Dad, this place. It finally feels like home. I nodded, with a smile the wind almost carried away. And home, son, isn't where you live. It's where you learn to respect. I returned to the deck with a quiet heart. Behind me, the children's laughter mixed with the murmur of the sea, forming an old familiar melody. The song of Isabel, of time, and of forgiveness. That night I sat alone on the deck, looking at the sea spread out under the silver moonlight. The house was silent. You could only hear the waves and the murmur of the wind in the palms. Monica was putting the children to bed. Rick was tidying up the kitchen. I heard his faint laughter with the little ones, a simple, familiar sound, one I thought I'd never hear again. I took out my phone and dialed Robert, my old friend. And now, Arthur? Has the storm passed? I laughed quietly. Yes, but it left lessons in every corner of the house. And your son? He learned to listen, and I learned not to shout. We talked for a bit and hung up. The sea air came in, smelling of salt and night. I looked at Isabel's portrait on the table. The moon lit up her face. I murmured, See, Isabel? He finally understood. I didn't have to lose my voice, just stay silent and firm. The door opened slowly. Rick came out, hands in his pockets, a little awkward. Dad, the kids are asleep. We're leaving early tomorrow. All right, the sea will send you off in its own way. He smiled. Dad, I wanted to tell you something before we go. I'm listening. Thanks for not giving up on me, for not letting my arrogance destroy this. I looked at him in the moonlight. In his face, I recognized the young man I had once been, stubborn, sure of himself, but now softened by what he had learned. Rick, I said, you don't teach with anger. You teach with boundaries. And you needed boundaries. And you needed to be heard. I understand that now. We were silent for a few long seconds. Then I added, It hurt me more that you came without asking. Not because of the people you brought, but because you forgot that I have dreams too. Rick lowered his head. I'll never forget that again, Dad. Monica appeared with 2 cups of hot tea. One for you, Mr. Miller. I smiled. Thank you, honey. This house will always have a place for respect and hot tea. The 3 of us sat watching the sea. The steam from the tea warmed my hands, and in that instant, I understood that all storms pass, but only those who remain standing in the wind learn to live in calm. Rick stood up. Dad, can I come visit you soon? Anytime you want. Just ask me first. He laughed, relieved. I promise. Before going in, he turned back to me. Dad, you know what this sea taught me? What's that? That respect isn't inherited, it's learned. And sometimes you learn it late. I nodded. Better late than never, son. The door closed. I was left alone with the sound of the waves. I looked into the distance where the moon fell on the sea like a path to memories. I whispered for the wind to carry it. This house, Isabel, is now exactly what we dreamed of. A place without orders, only with voices that know how to listen to each other. I went inside and turned off the light, letting the moon illuminate her portrait. I knew that the next day, when Rick left, the sea would once again teach him what every father wishes his son to understand. Love doesn't need noise, but it does need boundaries, and respect is the sweetest form of affection. I sat down, closed my eyes, and let the waves lull me to sleep. In my dreams, Isabel was smiling. The sea continued to sing, and the house, for the first time, belonged completely to peace.